Hi, my name is Linda McCormick. This is my story of how, as a Christian mom, I experienced the discovery that my son had cancer, my struggles with faith and emotions throughout, and where I'm at today, 2.5 years later. Spoiler alert, there's no beautiful happy ending, because life after the death of a child is something you have to face every day. You don't just arrive at a place where you're fine now. In 2019, our lives were pretty good. We had 2 healthy sons who were just heading off to school. Curtis at 19 to college to learn carpentry, and Connor, 18, to university in Ontario to take engineering. And although we had no illusions about them being perfect, we were happy that they were hardworking, conscientious, and had chosen to follow the Lord with their lives. Now my husband Craig and I had arrived at a new stage. We were just about to become empty nesters. Life made sense. It was stable and more or less predictable. We could see a beautiful future laid out before us, including a 25th anniversary cruise coming up very soon. Then one evening, everything changed. In October, on the 3rd, we got a call from Curtis saying, "Don't worry, but I'm in the ER getting checked out. My back hurts and I'm having trouble breathing sometimes. I'm sure it's nothing, but I just wanted to let you know." Curtis was our firstborn son. He was independent, happy, strong-willed, caring, and outgoing. He had just started college an hour and a half away from home. He had been looking forward to this independence for a long time. We figured he probably just needed a puffer and would be sent home. Nothing to worry about. An hour or 2 later, we got a call that a large mass had been found behind Curtis's left lung. It was worrisome and should be biopsied. A hospital in Halifax could do that, but we had to wait for a spot. It took 10 very long days for him to get a spot in the hospital where they could do a biopsy, and then another week to 10 days to get the results. Finally, the doctor called us one evening. The biopsy showed signs of the mass being a sarcoma. We had no idea what that meant, but he told us it was a type of cancer. He then said that an operation would be needed to remove the mass, and it would be performed in about 2 weeks. Since Craig and I were just approaching our 25th anniversary on November 19, I had been actively planning an amazing trip for quite some time. We had a cruise booked for mid-November, and it was now late October. Curtis's surgery was scheduled for 1 week before the cruise. So we canceled our trip and stayed home with our boy through his major surgery. Hopefully they could remove the mass and the cancer would be gone. We could go on our trip again later. After the surgery, we were told that they had not been able to remove the entire mass, so some treatments would be needed. We should wait for oncology to contact us. Oncology is the cancer department. For almost 6 weeks, no one called us. We called, left messages, called again, and no one got back to us. The only information we could find about sarcomas was online, and it was all bad. Anyone we asked, including our family doctor, did not know anything about his rare type of sarcoma. Furthermore, we were completely unsettled as to what the next 6 to 12 months would look like. Would there be chemo, radiation? Could Curtis go back to school since he'd had to leave at the beginning of October? We prayed a lot during this time, reaching out to God for comfort and peace, as well as healing, of course. Friends and family members prayed too. We were lovingly and prayerfully supported. That helped, but it was still a very difficult time. Finally, a week before Christmas, 2019, we saw an oncologist in Halifax. He explained that sarcomas are extremely aggressive and almost always return if they don't get every single molecule out. He said that Curtis's synovial sarcoma was attached to his ribs and lung wall, and it was impossible to get out. Nothing could be done, no treatments were recommended, and Curtis was going to die. So, how do you deal with the shock that your son, who was perfectly healthy 6 months ago, is dying? You're in shock. You cry. You pray. You ask others to pray. And you look for a second opinion. I emailed a sarcoma specialist from Toronto on a Sunday afternoon. And miraculously, she got back to me almost immediately. She said she would see Curtis if we could bring him up to Toronto. We took him up at the beginning of January, and we were so relieved to be told that they could make a plan to make Curtis better. A team of the best doctors available would be working on his case. What a huge answer to prayer. We were so happy. 4 days later, just after arriving back in Nova Scotia, Curtis started coughing up blood. And suddenly it seemed like maybe this was the end. Surely they would not now be able to help him. We were devastated, scared, and completely at a loss. But the Lord stepped in and allowed doctors to fix the problem with a simple procedure. The plan could still go ahead. Curtis had his first chemo treatment a few days later, mid-January 2020. In February, the Toronto surgeon said he would be willing to try surgery to remove the cancer in early summer, but only if it didn't spread, only if the chemo shrunk the tumor, and there was actually only a small chance the surgery would work. Our oncologist in Halifax, when he heard this, doubted that it would be possible and was shocked that anyone thought they could fix it. We were scared again. We didn't understand why the Lord allowed all this uncertainty and pain. Where was the peace and comfort? The next few months were difficult. COVID happened, and Curtis had to go through some of the chemo treatments, 5 days each, alone in hospital. This was so hard on us all. Our emotions were a roller coaster of ups and downs. We tried to focus on joy through the good days when Curtis was feeling well between treatments. Connor was back home again doing his schoolwork online, and we were happy to have a full house. We felt God gave us encouragement through family and friends that sent messages and food and gifts to cheer us up. For the first time in our lives, we had to rely completely on Him. We couldn't fix this problem ourselves, no matter what we tried to do. That's an incredibly difficult lesson to learn. A complete loss of control is debilitating when you're used to dealing with problems as they arise. We had to learn that God was in control, not us. When that happens, and it has to do with your child, it's not easy. When you're a parent, a 19-year-old is still your child. A few years earlier, I remember reluctantly praying and giving my children and husband completely over to the Lord. I knew He only had our best interests at heart, and it was the right thing to do. Now, this was really put to the test. What would God allow to happen in this situation? July came and was terrible. Curtis's health deteriorated to the point where he was in almost constant pain, and his breathing was very labored. I remember sitting on the couch beside him day after day, begging God to take away his pain and heal his body. As a mom, this was torture. It seemed again like this was the end, and there was no way he'd be well enough for surgery at the end of July. He was barely eating, and the tumor had started to grow again. Humanly speaking, it seemed impossible. We were shocked but incredibly grateful when the surgeon said he would go away with the life-saving surgery that Curtis needed. It was a massive operation, over 8 hours long. His entire left lung, some ribs, and part of his diaphragm were removed. It was very scary. We prayed so hard, and everyone we knew was praying too. Then we got great news. The surgery was successful. What a huge answer to prayer. Curtis was pronounced cancer-free and sent home to recover. During the fall of 2020, Curtis was told to go back to living a normal life, to regain his strength, and in October, his 3-month scan showed there was still no cancer. We were incredibly thankful, but still worried. We knew the rate that this cancer returned in people, and you can't just shut down the part of your brain that worries. Curtis was very thin. He wasn't eating a lot, and he also didn't have a lot of energy. We hoped and prayed that this would change over time. In late fall, the Ontario specialist called to say that Curtis had qualified for a drug trial that would teach his body to identify and attack cancer cells in case his cancer came back. This was very promising, and we were told to go back to Toronto in January for all the tests this trial required. So, towards the end of January 2021, we took Curtis back to Ontario. One day, while driving home after a few appointments, I remember being in the McDonald's drive-thru with Curtis, and I looked up his latest scan results. He had just had his 6-month scan. I was devastated to see that the cancer had come back and now was all over his abdomen. This meant more chemo and treatments. It was so disappointing. So there I am in the drive-thru, feeling terrible, and Curtis was sitting right beside me. I had to act normal and drive another hour home before I could talk to someone about it. We decided not to tell Curtis for a day or two. We wanted him to enjoy things for as long as possible. It was about 3 days later that I got a call from the specialist on the case. She said that the tests Curtis had taken showed that his heart function had been damaged by all the cancer treatments he had received, and he was no longer eligible for the drug trial. There was nothing more to be done. She estimated he had 6 to 12 months to live. I was on the phone in complete shock. Again, all the ups and downs of the past 15 months, and now we're being told for sure that all treatments had been expended. Our 20-year-old son was dying. How do you face that as a parent? How do you tell your son the news? What about his brother? No one is equipped to deal with that. No one. So again, we prayed, we cried, and we reached out for support and prayers. All over Canada and around the world, many people were praying for a miracle. We knew that God could raise Curtis back up to full health and strength again, but it seemed to become increasingly clear that this probably wasn't his plan. In March, we called Connor home to spend time with his brother, and my sister Cindy came out to support us. Over the next few weeks, we watched our boy lose weight, lose energy, and sleep a lot more. He turned 21 on March 9. He should have had his whole life ahead of him. He wanted to marry and have a family. He had hopes and dreams, and we had to help him come to terms with the fact that he was going to die very soon, not in 6 to 12 months, not even in 6 to 12 weeks. It was the worst thing anyone can experience. For Craig and I, especially as Curtis's primary caregivers, it was traumatic, horrifying, and ongoing torture. Curtis did not want any more hospital stays, so we kept him at home with ongoing help from palliative care and the great VON nurses that come to the home. After watching him deteriorate for what felt like an eternity, we were thankful when, on April 5, God finally took Curtis home. We were relieved. No more pain. Curtis was finally at peace, healthy again, happy, and with his Heavenly Father. That lasted about a couple of weeks. Then the trauma and doubts came roaring back. How could God be so mean? Why did Curtis have to suffer so much? He was living a life for the Lord. He could have done so much. Why him? Why not some bratty kid who was making everyone miserable and whom the world could well live without? I know this isn't necessarily a good thought, but it's what goes through your head at a time like this. Job 3:25 says, "What I had feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true." Throughout the whole experience of cancer, treatments, sickness, and especially the roller coaster of emotions, you start to think about everything you've been taught about God and prayer. Pray boldly. Pray specifically. Trust God. Leave it with Him. He will work out everything for good. Now, after you've done all that, your child is dead, and all you can think about is the trauma God allowed and why He didn't stop it, despite you begging Him over and over. You forget about what He did, and all you can remember is what He didn't do. It's a terrible place to be. Being raised as a Christian with a strong faith, and suddenly finding yourself completely rethinking everything you've always clung to, shakes you up. Everyone's experience with trauma or loss is different, and you don't have to suffer the loss of a child to wonder how God can allow terrible things to happen to people we love. It's an age-old question, but one that so many people want or need an answer to. I can't answer that question, but I can tell you how my story has gone. It's been a long, hard road. I still struggle sometimes with anger. Some days I'm fine and I feel like it's going to be okay. And other days I'm still crushed with grief. Sometimes I feel so alone. I don't know a lot of other mums who've watched their son or daughter go through what mine did for quite a long time and with the same outcome. Despite these struggles, I knew that it was important for me, for Craig and I, to work towards restoring our faith and relationship with the Lord. He was still the rock and the most important stabilizing factor in our lives. My journey continues to be very slow and definitely not in a straight line. It's painful at times, but there are also moments of praise, like when I remember how the Lord led us to the specialist in Toronto who gave us an extra year with Curtis, and the surgeon who agreed to perform life-saving surgery on Curtis when he was so unwell. I remember the hugs and the time spent with Curtis during his treatments and the amazing nurses we had. I think about Connor and what a blessing he is to Craig and me, and also how helpful it was for us to be able to stay at Cindy's during all those necessary stays in Ontario. I recently listened to a sermon that talked about bad things and how they happen to both Christians and non-Christians equally. This includes cancer, accidents, war, terrible crimes, fire, and so many other tragedies. As Christ followers, we are not exempt. This helped to remind me that God wasn't doing this to us or to Curtis. He wasn't trying to prove a point or ignore us. It's the unfortunate way the world works. Terrible things happen. The speaker talked about the often misunderstood verse, better translated in the New International Version, Romans 8:26. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So even when terrible things in life happen, and they do, God is always working for good through those times, through the people that show up to help out with food or comfort, people who pray and mourn with you, the people that you can now understand and walk alongside through their struggles, and the new understanding of so many things you'd never been faced with before. I am also thankful that I reached out to professionals for help, like my nurse practitioner and my amazing therapist. In times of difficulty or crises, help through medication and counseling can make a real difference. Now, in the fall of 2023, it's been 2.5 years since our boy passed away. There are and will continue to be days and weeks in the future that are a real struggle. I know that for a fact. So Craig and I will continue to focus on enjoying all the good days, especially our times with Connor, and supporting each other through the bad days. One day we will all be together again, and I'm looking forward to that so much. Until then, my love, I miss you more than anything.